Well, I'll tell you what, I think he appreciated everybody singing like they did, don't you, Mike?
Makes my job easy.
Make you I tell you, I thought it was great. Tonight we're going to continue in a series where I'm going through the Bible in a different way than I've ever done before. I went through book by book, but this time I'm going through just kind of highlighting, I think, some of the theme of the Bible. We looked at Ruth, I think it was last week, and talked about the judges and all this. But now we are getting to a time that we are going to go to basically First Samuel. And we are going to find that finally after years, the 12 tribes was there, right? The 12 tribes lived. But as we read so oftentimes the 12 tribes in the book of Judges, you see them even fighting among themselves. Does that make sense? There was 12 tribes, but there was never any time do you see them combined. You find that this judge led what? I think the most of it was ever led was 7 or 8. That was a big bunch. Most of the time it was 2, 3, 4. We read about all the judges. They led Israel. They saved them. But a lot of times it was the western frontier or the eastern frontier or the south or the north, and they was fighting. They fought. Matter of fact, they even fought among themselves. They had a civil war that they almost wiped out one tribe. I mean, they almost wiped out to the point that they lost all and almost vanished, the tribe of Benjamin. Great story in itself. But then we can see that in the book of 1 Samuel, we see where God is going to unite again the Israelites. He's going to unite them. Now, he united them, and I think the story is great because in the uniting, the story starts, David, do you know what it starts with? It starts with a woman. Isn't that true? It starts with the story of a woman. And I've had some people say women don't have enough of a key role in the Bible. The Bible doesn't mention women. I tell you what, the key roles about the Bible, almost every one of them starts with women. Tell you the truth. Because in this story, when we see, I know the book is called Samuel. But Samuel, like every man I know, he started with a woman, his mother, right? And we can see that the story itself starts with the woman. The story of the woman of Hannah. You know what I'm saying that? Hannah. Anybody know anybody named Hannah? Mm-hmm. You know, I think we do. Hannah, we know that. Well, why? Well, Hannah was a mother who gave. I would say she was a woman that gave. She really gave. And more than anything else, we're going to see that she gave faith and love to God. Even though she felt shortened so much at the beginning. And I'm going to tell you the story more than read some of it because you can read it. But we find that she married a man and he had 2 wives. Now, the great thing about the story of this marriage is it said that his wife, the husband, loved her more than anyone else. And I can see she must have been a fantastic woman because a man we can think of is made happy so oftentimes because he has children, right? Especially in that time because they was the inherit. But all of a sudden we find the other wife end up having 1, 2, 3, 4, end up having boys and girls, and Hannah was loved. But here it was that when they went down, she went with him and his other wife, and they went down into Jerusalem to worship. Now, I like this. It says they went down. I don't think all Israelites did that. I think the Israelites was like church members. They don't all come on Sunday. Right? But they said they went down every year. Hannah, her husband, and the other, they went down. And his wife loved him so much. Her husband loved her so much. He gave a portion to his both wives, to his children, to offer to God. But then he gave Hannah. What did he give Hannah? double portion. A double portion. That's how much he loved her. A double portion to her. But her countenance fell. Well, that's a fancy way of saying she got a, she was sad. Because there she was. He gave to her. He gave to her. But what did he give her? He gave her love. But a wife was expected to give what? Children. So it came to the point that he said, well, why are you so upset? And she was upset because, and she even went down, and I love the story of what happened in chapter 1 of the book of 1 Samuel. And she says, and she was bitter. This is when she was in Jerusalem. And she was a bitterness of soul, and prayed to the Lord, and wept in anguish. Then made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant, and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a male child, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall come upon his head. Now we read other places, that's the Nazarite vow. A vow that the person was dedicated only to serve God. Other people cut their hair, but when someone was that, they could not shave. They could not cut their hair. They was dedicated just to what? To God. She said, I will give him. And it said that it happened as she continued praying before the Lord, that Eli watching her mouth. Now Hannah spoke in her heart. Only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore, Eli thought she was drunk. I don't know about you. I have been around more drunk people when I was growing up than most kids, I think, or a lot of kids. And a lot of times you see a drunk, what would they be doing, David? Sitting over there what? Mumbling to themselves, talking to them. You can tell somebody was drunk if you went by them and saw them that they're talking to themselves. That was a sign of what? Intoxication. That was a sign of it. That was a sign of it back then, right? So he looked at him. So he looked, Eli said to her, how long will you be drunk? Put your wine away from you. But Hannah answered and said, no, my Lord, I am a woman of what? Soulful spirit. I'm unhappy. I have drunk neither wine nor intoxicated drink, but have poured out my soul before the Lord. Poured out my what? Soul before the Lord. Earnestly prayed to God. Do not consider your maidservant a wicked woman, for out of the adversity of my complaint and grief I have spoken until now. Then Eli answered and said, go in peace, and the Lord and the God of Israel grant you what? Your petition, which you have asked of him. He said, the Lord answer your petition. What was the petition? Did he know? He didn't know. He said, answer your petition. And so she went away. Now, I tell you what, she prayed. Then the priest came to her, got on to her, condemned her. She said, no, this is what, and then the priest said, it's going to be answered. So what did she do? She rejoiced. That's how much faith this woman had. And she said, let your maidservant find favor in your eye. So the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer what? Sad. She wasn't sad. The man of God told me what? I prayed to God, told me that it was going to be what? Answered. What did she pray for? She prayed for what? A child. What was she going to do with the child? Give it to God. Matter of fact, and it was going to be dedicated to serve God at the Nazareth. It said, oh, now, she had so much faith in this. And I don't understand this all the way. You may, I don't. But she made a decision and she said, I'm going to give him not only that, but she made and said in prophecy, I would say, that he was going to do what for God? Serve God what? All of his days. Isn't that something? So we have a man made a prophecy, it's going to be fulfilled. Then the woman said the prophecy that we saw was going to be fulfilled, that her son was going to be what? A Nazarene, to serve God, Nazarene, to serve God all his life. I think this is just tremendous to see this woman. It says, then she rose and worshiped before the Lord and returned and came to their house. You read the rest of this, you're going to find out. But what happened was they ended up, they had a child. And she told him, and I like this. She told him, said, now, I have this child, but I'm going to give that child to the Lord. So I look at verse 23. So her husband said to her, do what seems best to you. Wait until you have weaned him. Only what? Only let the Lord establish. Now this, my version says his words. Some of the translations say her words or your words. But what he was saying, wait and see if, I believe the meaning is this. He said, wait to see that what you said told me is God's will or not. That's what he was doing. Wait and see if that's what he wants. You can see he had a little doubt, didn't he? He didn't have an assurance, but he said, wait to see. It says, then the woman stayed and nursed her son until he had weaned her. And by the way, a lot of people say weaned her. You mean he went and she took him when he was 9 months old? They didn't wean baby back then at 9 months old. Y'all did know that, right? Most time a child was weaned at about, the youngest was over 2. And a lot of times it wasn't unknown for them to wait till they was 3 to be weaned. They didn't have the baby formula we have today, okay? And that was, so he was, and I have seen, and he was probably what we would say a toddler when he was taken to be with him. And notice that she had said, and gave him to what? To serve God. Look at 2 and 11. 2 and 11. It says, then the priest, Elisha? Oh, no, how do you pronounce the priest's name?
Elkanah.
Elkanah?
Elkanah.
Went to his house, Raymond, and the child and ministered to the Lord before Eli, the what? The priest. He did that. Why? Because she gave his son to serve what? To serve God. Mom, I know this sounds funny, but I don't know how she did it. Does that make sense? I don't know how she did it. But because of this, I do like what happened later. She gave it to him, and then we find out that God blessed her. For years, her wound had been closed, but she ended up having, I think, what, 5 children, as you mentioned? 5 or 6 that she had after him. The Lord blessed her, and all of a sudden, she ended up having a wife. And she had to be getting up on age, right? Because she had been years without a child, but then all of a sudden the Lord blessed her and she had what? Many more. So when she came back every year and brought him a coat, brought him something. It doesn't mention, but I know it's there. I know it happened. Because the children went, he got to see his what? He got to see his siblings what? Every year also. Isn't that neat? He wasn't alone. He wasn't left alone. He knew that his family cared for him. And he also had the statement that he knew because of what God, he knew. And we know that the priest knew that he was blessed because she came back and she said to him, and I didn't read that, but she said to preach. She said, I'm that woman that you told it would be fulfilled. And I'm telling you it was. He didn't even know what it was. Did he remember her? I don't know if he did or not. But he did know finally, and we talk about that next week, we find out that it was God's plan, because he found out how special that boy was, and how that boy, how that baby was going to change the history of Israel from that of a bunch of tribes to a unit, consolidated, working together to bring about the coming of the promise that God had given. Isn't that something? I think that's just great. Hannah gave his son to worship God. And if you want some good reading, we won't read it tonight, but I want you to read it. I'd like for you to read 2nd chapter 1 through 10 when you get home, because that has a message all in itself. It's almost a contained sermon thought that is, I think, one of the greatest prayer. It's a woman talking to God. One of the greatest prayers that we find in the Bible. Are women important? Amen.